Excellencies, distinguished participants from all over the world, Namaskar, a very good afternoon to you all. I'm delighted to participate at this panel discussion on international cooperation for facilitating a just and inclusive energy transition. I wish to thank Observer Research Foundation and Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, as well as Indian Embassy in Jakarta, for inviting me to participate. The devastating impact of climate change due to global warming has become visible. World Meteorological Organization has warned that we have a very small window to minimize its impact. We can no longer reverse it. Transition to a carbon neutral or a net zero or what we call green economy has become inevitable. It's no longer a matter of our choice. Global problems require global solutions. No country can do enough on its own to prevent global warming or to deal with its impact. However, the requisite international cooperation has been missing, or it has been adequate. While the need for access to finance and technology has been accepted, the progress has been very inadequate in spite of all the promises that have been made to developing countries since Paris Accord of 2015. The demand of the developing countries for climate justice has largely been ignored. In this scenario, South-South cooperation provides a way forward. According to World Meteorological Organization's latest report, Asia has been suffering the most from the consequences of global warming. We therefore need to find solutions within Asia. We need more deliberations on how Asia can work together to make progress in mitigation and adaptation. Jakarta Futures Forum therefore provides an ideal platform to engage in such discussions. Since there is no pan-Asian organization which brings together all the member countries of Asia, regional organizations like ASEAN, BIMSTEC, Pacific Islands Forum, or Indian Ocean Rim Association can provide the kind of platform that we need, where countries can engage together in regional cooperation. It has been well recognized that regional and sub-regional organizations do play a pivotal role in fostering international cooperation by bringing together countries with common interests and priorities. These organizations understand the unique political, security, and developmental dynamics of their regions, and in view of their small membership, they find it easier to identify convergences and build consensus. Regional organizations, therefore, in my view, like ASEAN and BIMSTEC, are well placed to lead regional cooperation in energy sector in South and Southeast Asia, with a view to contribute to transition of their member states to green energy and green growth. Here, allow me briefly to speak about BIMSTEC, because it's not a very well-known regional organization. BIMSTEC is an intergovernmental organization with 7 member states, bordering or located in close proximity of Bay of Bengal region. Out of our 7 members, 5, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka are from South Asia, and 2, Myanmar and Thailand, are from Southeast Asia. BIMSTEC thus provides a vital link between 2 sub-regions of Asia, South and Southeast Asia. BIMSTEC member states together are home to around 1.8 billion persons, a significant part of global population. Our member states include some of the fastest growing large economies of the world, and their combined GDP in 2022 amounted to US dollar 4.5 trillion. BIMSTEC was established in 1997, 30 years after ASEAN. It has its own charter now and well-established core and sectoral mechanisms, including periodical summits, ministerial meetings. There are clearly delineated 7 sectors for regional cooperation, with each member state being made responsible for leading cooperation in one sector. The BIMSTEC Charter, which was adopted in March 2022, empowers BIMSTEC to engage in external relations to foster mutually beneficial cooperation with our developmental partners. We are open to explore the opportunities for working together with the interested member states as well as UN, international and regional organizations. I'm also happy to share with you that BIMSTEC Charter allows us to welcome observers as well as new members in accordance with the established procedures. BIMSTEC is poised to play a leading role in pursuit of regional cooperation in Bay of Bengal and beyond. An eminent persons group has been established, which has been entrusted with the task of making recommendations to reform and revitalize BIMSTEC. The report of the group will be considered by the next summit, which is scheduled to be held very soon. The 6th summit is also likely to adopt what we call Bangkok Vision 2030, which will provide a roadmap for BIMSTEC. There will be an agreement on maritime transport cooperation, which will be signed during this summit. Now, to focus on the issue that we are dealing with during this panel discussion, since the establishment of BIMSTEC in 1997, the leaders have recognized the enormous potential for hydropower and renewable energy that the member states have, which can be harnessed for their benefit. With the presence of some of the fastest growing economies as its member, the energy needs of BIMSTEC member states have been growing and will continue to grow in future. The first BIMSTEC Energy Ministers Conference, which was held in New Delhi in 2005, adopted a plan of action for energy cooperation, which proposed establishment of task force on BIMSTEC trans-power exchange and development, establishment of a task force on trans-BIMSTEC gas pipelines, establishment of a BIMSTEC energy center, and development of hydropower projects. There has been significant progress in implementation of some of these proposals. A memorandum of understanding for establishment of BIMSTEC grid interconnection was signed in August 2018. The MOU aims to facilitate electricity trade in the Bay of Bengal region and provides a broad framework for BIMSTEC member states to cooperate towards interconnection of their electricity grids with a view to promote electricity transmission and trade. There is a committee which has been currently engaged in finalizing the BIMSTEC policy for transmission of electricity and also the BIMSTEC policy for trade, exchange of electricity and tariff mechanism. These are the basic tools for enabling cross-border electricity transmission and trade. A BIMSTEC energy master plan is also being developed with the help of Asian Development Bank. We are hopeful that this master plan will facilitate identifying the bottlenecks and missing links in developing a regional grid without duplicating the already existing bilateral and trilateral arrangements among our member states. Once implemented, it will contribute significantly to inclusive and affordable transition of our member state to green energy. A BIMSTEC Energy Center is being established in Bangalore in India, which will work towards promoting energy cooperation and facilitating sustainable energy development in our region. BEC will act as a knowledge hub, gathering and disseminating information, data and best practices related to energy sector. BIMSTEC is thus poised to play a significant role in facilitating green energy transition and green growth within the Bay of Bengal region. By enhancing connectivity and infrastructure, member states would be able to optimize their utilization of renewable energy resources and improve their energy access and security. Excellencies, let me also add here that given the grave challenges faced by our member states due to climate change, they have been committed to transition from traditional fossil fuel-based energy sources to cleaner and more sustainable alternatives, including solar, wind, and hydropower. For example, Bangladesh has set the goal of achieving 15% of electricity from renewable sources by 2030, 40% by 2041, and 100% by 2050. India has pledged to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2070, and it intends to reach 50% of India's cumulative electricity power installed capacity from non-fossil sources by 2030 and reduce the carbon intensity of its GDP by 45% as compared to 2005 levels by 2030. In its energy sector development plan for 2015 to 2025, Sri Lanka has increased the share of electricity generation from renewable sources of energy from 50% in 2014 to 60% by 2020, and it is committed to reduce the carbon footprint of the energy sector by 5% by 2025. Thailand has committed to reach carbon neutrality by 2050 and net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2065. In Myanmar, Energy Master Plan for 2016-2030, Myanmar has committed to generate 62% of electricity from renewable sources by 2030, 57% from hydropower, and 5% from solar and wind. Both Nepal and Bhutan have significant hydropower potential and have been harnessing their renewable resources for electricity generation. They are also exploring the opportunities to develop other forms of renewable energy, including solar and wind power, to meet their energy needs, but also to meet the energy needs of other countries in the region. As many of you are aware, India has led a number of global initiatives also in energy sector, like International Solar Alliance, One Sun, One World and One Grid initiative, and Life for Sustainable Environment. In conclusion, I would like to state that BIMSTEC is committed to work together with the interested states from within and beyond the region and the relevant UN and international organizations for the benefit of our member states, including in facilitating just and inclusive energy transition. It will be useful, I believe, to bring together key regional organizations in Asia, like ASEAN, BIMSTEC, Indian Ocean Rim Association, GCC, Pacific Islands Forum, and others, on a platform to discuss regional cooperation, not only in vital sector of energy or matters related to climate change, but also in other sectors where there are opportunities for countries from Asia to work together in order to meet their sustainable goals. As I conclude, let me again thank on behalf of the member states of BIMSTEC, the ORF, FPCI, and the Embassy of India in Jakarta for convening this Futures Forum and providing BIMSTEC an opportunity to speak about its priorities in energy transition. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, excellencies. It's really honor to represent Indonesia Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources that cannot be here because he is now in foreign and talking about the energy as well. And I'm happy to joining the Jakarta Future Forum, Blue Horizon Green Growth. So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I extend my gratitude also to FPCI and Embassy of India and friends from all over the global. So, regarding to our net zero emission target, I heard that India have a target on 2070. So we know that Indonesia have a target on 2060, and on the our concept of global energy transitions, we are focusing on the security, affordability, and sustainability. And now we present the challenge and the opportunity, especially for developing nations. I know we all know very well that in India have an ambition energy agenda, and Indonesia has a commitment to renewable, demonstrate our renewable energy potential. So in our NDC target, we have 358 million ton of CO2 to be reduced. And of course, now we are already talking about the second NDC, because the peak emission of Indonesia now will be reached into the highest one more than 2035. So we are now already being discussed to reduce more. And with the emission reduction commitment, we have several strategies to do especially in energy sector. We want to accelerate the reduction that using several pathway. In the energy efficiency, we accelerate this one, and we're talking to the JETP that we are committed also to do the energy efficiency, and the activity of that, including electric vehicle, of course, and then we want to improve the efficiency of cooking, because you know that's a big portion of our Indonesia economy. It's people, and then we have the biggest one at here. So we want to improve the efficiency of cooking. So it will be one of the energy efficiency pathway. And then we want to accelerate renewable energy, of course. And we have many strategy to do, like co-firing, direct use of renewable energy, and also we want to accelerate the biofuels. And recently we announced the PV rooftop, that we want to add more on the PV rooftop as big as 3.8 gigawatts. And of course, the clean energy for power plant, we are now thinking to phase down our power plant, and we have 13 units now to be considered to retire. So we now calculating about the finance, and still have many discussion on the retirement of coal power plant. And of course, for low carbon fuel, it's one of our strategy also to reduce the emission. So in a big one conversion, we need to move from kerosene to LPG, and then LPG for the next biogas fuel. And of course, the post-mining reclamation is also our strategy to reduce the emission. So we are also have revised the net zero emission, our roadmap. But in here, we want to accelerate more CO2 reduction. And talking about the supply and demand roadmap, you can see that until 2060, we will have many introduction of the new energy, such as hydrogen, ammonia, and also massive implementation of the gas network and electric vehicle. And we want to accelerate the cross-border carbon mechanism also, that we're now talking about the carbon capture storage. So main pillars for the transition pathway, the utilization of the renewable energy. Of course, we're addressing the biomass, solar, wind, hydro, and we have a big potential of geothermal. Now the investment of geothermal is really, really tiny. And we want to accelerate the geothermal investment. Now government also putting the finance on this. We call it government drilling. And this year is the first year that we do the government drilling. We have 2 tenders right now. We're opening that. And this is the part of the government can own the risk. So we share it to the industry. That's one of the our strategy to accelerate the geothermal. And we have also low carbon practices, as I mentioned, that we accelerate the co-firing. We have 95 locations to be co-firing, and our target is 30%. Use the biomass to do the co-firing in our power plant. And of course, in another way, in the transportation sector, we want to use the electric vehicle and as well as the biofuel program, including from palm oil, and we call it biodiesel, and we want to reach until 40%. Now, this country have a biggest percentage of the biofuel in our transportation. We already have 35, biodiesel 35%, and we put more. We want to put more, maybe in this year or the next year. We want to achieve 40%. And we want to have 5% of ethanol, the bioethanol. Now it's already on the pilot plan. So I think next year would be, we want to accelerate the portion of the bioethanol to be part of the electrification in the transportation. And for the carbon capture storage and energy efficiency, I'm already mentioning previously. So we want to promote more efficient energy. Now the capital size of the electricity uses in Indonesia, it's about 1,000, which is, if we compare to the Japan or the other country, that a developed country, it reached to 7,000, about 7,000 kilowatt hour per year per person. So we want to accelerate the uses of the electricity as well for the efficiency. And then if you looking at the net zero emission roadmap, we want to put the nuclear power plant also to balance the grid. And we have a planning to put the nuclear power plant in 2033. So if you're looking at our map, it would be accelerate, well, step by step for the nuclear power plant, but we, 9 years from now, we want 250 megawatt at first step to be on grid. And several years until 35, we have 2 gigawatt of nuclear power plant. So I think this roadmap has been revised. So the depends on the solar power is increase, and then we add more on the geothermal and hydro. So for your information also, we have a super grid transition that we have big problem on the accessibility. Yes, this is the last one that I want to show you, that we have to deliver the electricity among the islands. So I think we invite for the international collaboration from here. And you can see that there is no grid in the East Indonesia. So we have, we want to have a more de-digitalization program. So I think that's all that I want to share to you. Hopefully we can have a big collaboration, many collaboration, because we want to invite international investment to our renewable energy mix in Indonesia. And for the next year, we still have a portion for 7 giga of renewable energy. So we really invite you all to our to make a green investment in our country. Thank you so much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
I'm really excited to be joined by this brilliant and esteemed panel. I'll keep my introduction quite short. Obviously, we are here to discuss just energy transition in the region and how do we accelerate that. I think the context, we've set the stage quite well today. India and Indonesia both have made quite ambitious commitments on the net zero agenda. India aiming to have 500 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030. Indonesia is pursuing just energy transition partnerships. So how can we, within quite a challenging context of financing not reaching developing and emerging economies, how can we, in that context, accelerate a truly just and inclusive transition? So what I'd like to speak to the panel about today is what kind of collaboration, partnerships, and policies do we need to pursue to enable and accelerate this? So can I first turn to Bandana, because in your role in Bihar to move the state of Bihar towards decarbonization, you were applauded at COP28 last year in the work that you did. And can you tell us what's the good news on decarbonization?
Decarbonization is the commitment. Both at the national level and at the sub-regional level, there's a clear commitment towards scaling down our emissions. And also there are policies and missions in place which actually strategizes this policy in a very time-bound manner. And at the global level, India has signatories, India has commitments, and the global powers have also committed. But how it translates at a regional, national, and then sub-regional level, that remains a challenge. And this is also an opportunity. How to scale, what experiments, what strategies are working at a very basic ground level, and how to scale it up. So when we talk about decarbonization, we are talking about scaling down of coal. Coal with India and as well as Indonesia is just not a fuel. It's also a source of revenue. It is also a source of employment. And it is also an aspirational thing. Because the very coal in India gives an employment to 20 million people. It is, that is only in the mining sector. And when we put the other concomitant things associated with coal, it scales up further. It also is employed, and the challenge is that it employs most unskilled people there. It employs marginal people. So how do we now, see, in this scenario, create a position where we are able to have a just and equitable transition. And the first thing that the regional cooperation that we can have is two most important actually. One is skilling. How do we skill those people to be ready for a green economy? What are the technology transfers that are needed and bilateral or a regional collaborations needed for energy efficiency transitions? So that I feel is very important aspect, scaling up the skilling. Also, then we need to create alternative job scenarios. If we are going to slowly move away from coal-based industries and move to more cleaner technologies, we need to create a job creation, employment opportunities. And that is what the government at local and regional level talking about. And finally, we need to talk about the social security, because these are the women, marginal, landless laborers. These are the most marginal people of the society, and how do we create a sense of social security network around them so that they are able to see this transition in a more positive manner, and as a government we are able to provide, we can cater to the aspirations of this sector.
I think that's a great definition of practical terms, what a just and inclusive transition really means. I'd like to turn to you, Kuki, if you can tell us from an Indonesian perspective, first of all, what has been the barrier to making the transition just and inclusive, and how are we pivoting to accommodate that?
Okay, thank you. And I think I just to continue from what Bandana just mentioned earlier. For us also, one of the biggest issue is talking about the just part, right? The people. So how we can ensure that, let's say, talking about workforce, how we can ensure that those affected can be in a way, if I can say, helped and supported. But also on top of that, I think what is also more important is how to prepare for the next one, the next generation. For example, now if we are talking about education, right now, I think similar to what happened in India, because Indonesia is, we have quite abundance of fossil-based resources, right? So most of the, let's say, the studies in the university is talking about fossil. So we need to shift also from that point. So it's not only, I agree that skilling, reskilling, and upskilling is important, but also to prepare from even the fresh grade kind of thing, right? That would be the first one. But I think I would like also to add maybe some other dimension of the just itself. I think talking about the nation, so if we are talking about just, then it shouldn't be adding burden to the country that doing the transition, right? Because those countries may have their own resources, they have their local resources. The issue now is with whatever that they have, definitely they will transition anyway, but the timing is another story, right? So what we would like to see, in fact, talking about the global agenda, for example, we would like to see it happen as soon as possible. So we need to have like international cooperation, including fresh money, not debt, not loan, for example, especially not to talk about the renewable, because I think renewable will be, at the end of the day, it will be market driven anyway. But we need to deal with whatever that we are transitioning from, which is the fossil. So I think that's the important one. And the last part is also environmental impact. I think what we need also the international cooperation is to ensure, I think Pak Luhut mentioned also, how, for example, Indonesia in this case inviting companies to build their manufacture here so that we can get more workspace, we can have more, like more the economy will be here rather than sending out outside the country. So yeah, hope
Absolutely.
that can help.
Yes, yeah, very, I think, specific on international community support. And that brings me to Jean-Pierre. I'd like to ask you if you can tell us a bit about what the international community is doing currently to support just transition in the region. And is there something more that you think they could be doing, and how can we get there?
Thank you. I think that what the international community can do is just, it's mostly, I would say, sharing experience, because energy transition and the fight against climate change and also, I would say, fair social policy, which have to come along the fight against climate change, are the issues of everywhere and everybody. I mean, this is impacting us in France, in Europe, in the US, so sharing experiences, sharing knowledge. So we can be a sort of platform of know-how. Then, of course, we have to answer the demand of what we call our clients, I mean, the government, the private sector. We can encourage, of course, consultation of the civil society and so on in order to be as inclusive as possible. I'm always saying we're the country of the yellow jackets. So we know what is, I would say, an improper climate tax, and I would say the unrest that can be provoked by, I would say, clumsy policy. So exchange of experience, mobilizing the research, think tanks in order to get the new ideas, public policy dialogue. Policy dialogue in order to try to have some private sector friendly policy, because I mean the development partners are not that rich. They have the billions, but we need trillions to finance energy transition. So if we don't mobilize the private sector, if we don't mobilize the asset managers and so on, we won't manage actually to finance so huge challenges. And there are many others. There are blue economy and so on, which were discussed today. So it's not only energy transition. So enabling environment for the private sector, that's very important. In this respect, I would like always to insist on the, I would say, untapped full potential of public development banks. I mean, in Indonesia, we have so many of them, like PTSMI and so on and so forth. In India, there are so many of them as well. In Europe also. And if you put all of them together, if you mobilize them, and I mean, their shareholders are the states. I mean, you can green the finance, and you can leverage much more. So the role of development partners to bring ideas, to bring seed money, and to incentivize some new policies, and I would say also, yes, to try to convince to align the subsidies on a green, I would say, energy transition and not on fossil fuels. So platform, exchange, humility, and some seed money.
Thank you so much. And I think a point you've made about international community bringing ideas. So I'd like to turn to Dr. Naoyuki. Are there specific policies that developed economies have implemented that the region can learn from or maybe replicate and possibly even do better?
I think policy tools are very important in order to achieve net zero in 2060 or 2070. However, there are many policy tools right now in the world. One is issuing green bond. Second one is green credit rating. Third one is carbon pricing. Fourth one is green tax. Indonesia is going to introduce carbon pricing and so on. And they are all different criteria. Even with a carbon credit rating, depending on the credit rating agency, their scores are different from one company to another. The reason is they are not measuring the amount of CO2 emissions. I think it is very important to measure the CO2 emissions of each company and each household. And in Japan, we have introduced the school, at each school classroom, students can see the amount of CO2 emissions every hour. We used to have temperature that measures the temperature in the room. That thermometer now in Japan has amount of measurement of CO2 emissions. And in Yokohama City next to Tokyo, those equipments are set up in all the classrooms, primary school, secondary school, up to high school. Then students can realize how much CO2 they are producing in each classroom. Then the students brought those ideas, the same equipment, to their own house. I think those kind of measurement of CO2 is very important to make those policy instruments identical. Once we know the amount of CO2 emissions by small businesses, large companies, then all those four tools, carbon pricing, carbon tax, and carbon credit rating, all of them will become identical. So I think the most important thing in this world, Asia-Pacific region, we should have the measurement of CO2 emissions.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Naiki, just to, if you can add to that, carbon pricing, is that something the region is considering now, or should they be, and at what pace?
Carbon pricing, okay, Indonesia is going to introduce. However, current carbon pricing, Europe is very high, and China is almost close to zero. So carbon pricing is very different from country to country. The reason is, where is the cap where the company can produce their CO2? If this cap is very high, then carbon pricing will become almost zero. Europe is very low. The company can expose their CO2. So I think international cooperation and same carbon pricing is very important. Otherwise, that will distort the companies. For example, Toyota is located in Japan. And if the carbon pricing in Indonesia is much cheaper, then they may shift their headquarters to Jakarta from Tokyo. So I think that coordination of those pricings are very important.
Thank you. And building on the question of coordination, I'd like to go to you, Kuki. You were involved in the G20 negotiations. So are you able to share some reflections from that process? And what do you think the international community needs to do better? And how can we form more collaborative partnerships that are truly equal and meaningful?
Yeah, I think I just want to add a bit of what Dr. Naoyuki mentioned earlier. I think this talking about carbon pricing is interesting and important, and in a way, I think what we need also for us, at least Dr. Naoyuki, for maybe developing countries, is to understand the whole story about it, right? I mean, like what we don't want to see is that people trying to impose it without understanding it, and then you're gonna mix all the things together, and as you said, we might have instead of reducing emission, then we might have another additional emission somewhere else, as you said. But on the international cooperation, I think even though we are talking about G20 we have both, right? I mean, like developed as well as emerging countries from developing countries. And I think one maybe perceptions that most of us have if we are talking about international cooperation is always developed countries supporting developing countries. But in fact, right now, for example, we can see there are a lot of potential among developing countries. And I think this is something that we need to pursue as well, because to some extent there are quite a number of characteristics in terms of the population, the community, as well as in a way, maybe the policy, the governance in those countries that may help the cooperation in the so-called international cooperation can happen much better. And I think another area that we need to maybe start the building, which something that Indonesia is trying, is more on technology cooperation rather than just investment. So the technology cooperation in the sense that, let's say, foreign company coming and develop a certain technology, but also try to tailor it with, for example, with Indonesia. Because then with that, I mean, like Indonesia has one issue if we are talking about energy, including renewable energy, it's about the local content, right? And it has been like chicken and egg kind of thing. We won't be able to have like high enough local content if we don't have market. While the market will not be there if we don't have the supply of the technology. So I think a way of having like this joint cooperation, joint venture in the country is something that we need. And it will address, for example, local content in the case of Indonesia, but also to open market for a certain technology. And let's say if you are looking at Indonesia, for example, Indonesia may represent also the characteristic of other countries in this region. So having this happen in Indonesia, for example, that company will open a new market, which is not only Indonesia, but also the region. So I think that's what we need. And with that, then the know-how will be also not only transferred, I think, but also being developed together.
Thank you, Kuki. And do you have an example of something that Indonesia is doing to be able to create that policy environment for foreign companies to come and create that market?
Yeah, the one that referring to the earlier keynote by Pak Luhut, for example, right? How at least we are now trying to deal with nickel, for example. It's controversial, I know, but you know, for us, it's better to have also like longer chain of supply and the industry itself, rather than just exporting raw materials. Right? So that's what we are trying. And also another one is, for example, for renewable energy development, solar PV, for example, we are also inviting companies to develop their manufacture in Indonesia so that it can help both the local content because it's being developed in Indonesia, manufactured in Indonesia, and also to open the market and also to open access for us, the consumers, to get the, if I can say, hopefully cheaper technology than if we need to import it.
Thank you. And to Bandana, do you have experiences that you can share, either from Bihar or the work that's happening in India, about how do we take some of those local approaches and apply them to a national and regional context?
I'd like to share one somewhat successful that has happened in the region, that is in Bihar and across UP as well. It is about the brick kilns. Brick kilns employ, it's a manual labor, unskilled labor again, and it emits particulate matters and CHGs. So how do you now take this population, which is vulnerable, and how do you make and get a technology that can also benefit them economically and health-wise? So there are two technologies that have been developed. It's called a zigzag technology and a tunnel. So now to introduce that required cost. There's a cost involved. And there are for in Bihar, for example, there are 5,000 brick kilns employing over maybe 100,000 people. And how do you, and then there's a training, there's a skilling, and there's a technology involved. This technology transfer has to happen. But this happened over a period of a year. This change happened. Now, out of that, almost 80% the brick kilns have shifted to zigzag technology in Bihar, which is a huge achievement, and the emissions have come down, and we have been appreciated for it across the country. So now, how does this happen? This happened because all the stakeholders were sensitized about it. The larger goals were explained to them. Finances were made available, and the training happened. So this is one example I can think of which has changed the emission pattern. But it's a long way to go. There are a lot of challenges, like the speaker before me talked about the cooking. A lot of cooking is still coal-based. How do you enter each household, and how do you bring that transformation? Could be if we give subsidy, there's a cost involved. Alternatives are cost prohibitive. So here where the regional cooperation is important in terms of finances. We need not only our local finances from private sectors and from the government, of course, is investing, private sectors, but how do we scale it up so that the regional cooperation happens? And I'm glad that there are, in the COP, recently concluded COP, there is a talk about lost and damaged fund. So how do we access to that? So that, whenever we're talking about just an equitable transition, there are people at one end and the cost involved at the other end, and they too have to be reconciled.
Absolutely. And I think what you've described about ensuring that stakeholders are involved from beginning to end is quite crucial. So just building on the point about private finance, Jean-Pierre, if you can touch on this a bit more. You mentioned also about catalyzing private finance and how do we de-risk that for them. So what is the role for bilateral DFIs and for the multilateral banks here to really enable private sectors to invest more at the scale that we need?
Yes, thank you. By the way, I was very happy to hear about a discussion about energy efficiency. We're always talking about renewable energy, which is a tremendous potential, but energy efficiency is a huge reservoir of cost savings and so on. And when you have energy efficiency, you save also the money of households. I mean, that's fantastic. And also something I don't hear about is interconnections. Regional integration of electricity networks. Like this, you can exchange green electrons when you have too many of them because you've got another supply of renewable energy, you can sell them and so on. So that's something we should tap. So I think the scope of solution is huge. So that's a good news also. So what we should do actually to overcome these obstacles to the private sector. So first, what are the obstacles? The obstacles are make the market. I mean, make the market for the investors. And so what they want are, I would say, balanced tariffs. So they want also good PPA, good power purchase agreements. They want reliable off-takers. That means that someone will buy their green electrons eventually. They want fair rules. That means good regulators. And of course, that means a strong national operator. So what we can do and what we try to do with our partners from ADB, with our partners from the World Bank, from the KfW, from AIB, I mean, from the all goodwill players, and again, the national banks, the domestic banks, they are with us. And they are so strong. So I would say policy making on predictable tariffs, also predictable PPA. So this is dealt with during development policy rounds. It's sort of budgetary support, and against this support there is a dialogue, public policy dialogue. Oh, what have you been in South Africa? What have you? How did you tackle it in Pakistan and so on? So it's a sort of a forum like this one of the best practice. So then after, strengthening the capacity of the national operators, that's very important. Again, learning from each other in order to provide some goals with strategy, with roadmaps towards a net zero policy of those national entities. Training the staff in this respect. Regulator is always very sensitive because they are the referee between public producers and private producers. So I really trust a lot. I've got a strong interest for peer-to-peer dialogue. That means not private consultants, not development partners. Okay, a regulator who went through the same challenges talking to another regulator. They have the same difficulties with governments on their shoulders, with customers who are unhappy and so on. So we encourage peer-to-peer dialogue between regulators from the south, from the north. There is no global south, there is no global north. We are all in the same bucket, if I may say, to face the expectation of the population who are unhappy and to balance the economy and to keep prosperity. So sustainability and security, namely energy security. So peer-to-peer dialogue, and then of course training and exchange of expertise. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And back to Dr. Nayuki, you mentioned green bonds. Can you describe a bit more how we can access those? And actually, is that the kind of financing that we need? Kuki, you also mentioned not loans. So yeah, can you talk a bit more about the different types of financing that the region should be pursuing, and what are the barriers to accessing it?
currently, in order to issue green bonds, Europe has 10 criteria where we can issue green bond. One of them is energy efficient green building. And then another one is renewable energy. There are 10 criteria where green bonds can be issued. However, some of the green building may be 20% CO2 cut. Another building, 40% CO2 cut. Because there's no measurement of CO2 amount, that's why various kinds of renewable energy can issue same green bond. So I think it's very important to have accurate credit ratings based on the amount of CO2 emission. That is number one. Second one is green carbon pricing. It's going on in Indonesia and other countries. But carbon trading, I prefer it is within the country rather than cross-border. Because European case, there's no exchange rate problem in euro. That's why Europe is doing cross-border trading. However, if once we go into cross-border, exchange rate will be affecting to the carbon pricing. So I think I'd like to propose to Indonesia, you should have carbon trading within the country rather than going to abroad. Last one is government banks or international organizations such as ADB and the European developing banks. I think they should provide lower interest loans compared to private for those green investment and so on. Those kind of loans are very important, not only large businesses, but also small companies.
Thank you so much. I think we have about 9 minutes, so maybe just a final round for the panel. I'd like to talk quickly about critical minerals. It's a huge topic, so it's hard to speak about this in short, but obviously critical minerals are key to the energy transition, whether we're talking about battery storage, solar panels. So what do we need to keep in mind in terms of the critical mineral supply chain? So how do we ensure that sustainability without, again, becoming dependent on this? And this is an open question to anyone or everyone on the panel.
After financing, if you ask me, it's the minerals that is most crucial. And the supply chain of minerals need to be maintained. You need lithium, you need sodium, and India, for example, doesn't have enough reserves for it. So how do we maintain the supply chain? That is one, and that is where regional cooperation is very important. And second would be the recycling. There's a life cycle approach that we need to have. We are going to use solar, we are going to use, but there are going to be waste generated. How do you recycle this? And how do you now have a life cycle approach to minerals? I think these two are very, very important aspects to minerals.
Would anyone like to add to that? Okay.
Maybe I just want to add, because you already mentioned about the life cycle and so on. One part is the mining itself, right? Because I think mining has always been a big issue in anywhere. So what we need is to get, also support from those countries that already have a good practices in mining to help us in the country that rich with critical mineral, for example, to do the mining in a much better way, sustainable or more environmental friendly, if I can say, even though that might be difficult, but like reducing the potential environmental degradation and impact of that, so that, as you said, the supply chain can still be secured from where the mining is, but also, where the mining happen, the impact can be reduced or can be lessened, if I say.
Thanks so much. I think what we'll do then is move to the audience to see if there are any questions. I see one hand there.
Thank you so much for amazing session. My name is Alexander Aleshin, Institute of World Economy and International Relations, Russia. So my question is first of all to Professor Sojman. It's about nuclear energy. I want to ask about the prospects for cooperation with Russia in this field. Now Russia builds nuclear power plants in Bangladesh. For a long time, there have been underway negotiations with Indonesian government on the construction by the Russian corporation or setup of land-based or floating nuclear power plants, low mobility, and model stations. Why specific contracts haven't been signed yet? Are there any restrictions related to public opinion in Indonesia regarding nuclear energy or regarding to Western sanctions against Russia? Thank you.
Okay, since it's about Indonesia, so I'll try to respond to it. I might not be the right person to respond though. Ibu Ania earlier also during her keynote also mentioned about the potential or the possibility of Indonesia to have that. I think as you said, one definitely like all these the how do you call it the response or the response from the community, but also from what we learn at least in Indonesia, we said that nuclear will be kind of as much as possible the last resort. So I think that's why it is, and definitely it's still like pro and cons are still there. So maybe that's all I can respond to you. And I think, unfortunately, we don't have the people from the ministry any longer, so maybe that would be the right person to respond. Please.
Okay, thank you. I'm from Japan, and many of you know the Fukushima accident of nuclear power. And since then, Japan is very resistant against nuclear power. So now we are looking at the ocean waves. It is moving all the moments, and those ocean waves can be changed into electric power supply. So I think those kind of renewable energy could be possible to transfer the knowledge to many countries. And also the plastics are now recycled for the handbags, and also clothing can be produced from plastics. I think those kind of new technologies should be transferred within Asia-Pacific, India, Asia-Pacific regions. I think that will be a very good way in order to transfer technologies and knowledges.
Thank you so much. I think really, really interesting discussion. Thank you so much. I do want to just give you a moment to say some last words. Specifically, I'm wondering if there's one key message you'd like everyone in the room to take away about the region's energy transition. What would that be? So maybe first, Jean-Pierre, please.
I think that's my last word would be that an energy transition, which is supposed to be just, has to be fair. And that's a difficult equation, but it is possible. And that's the reason why we call it transition. That means it's not an abrupt decision. It's a journey from one point to another one which is wished.
What India has done in the field of its commitments, for example, we had promised that would bring down our supply, electric supply to non-fossil fuel, and we've achieved that. We are working towards our commitment for 500 gigawatt up to of renewables by 2030. And also, Prime Minister gave the call for Panchamrit, which not only at the federal level, but also at the sub-regional level, we are doing that. And my last words would be that what the Prime Minister has given, that life is lifestyle for environment. He's said that, and he's given a call for this. That it's also we are all negotiating here. We are talking, discussing, but we have to now start walking the talk by adopting the life.
So if I may just to continue what Jean-Pierre mentioned earlier, talking about transition, it means that we move from one point to another point. So it's important to understand where we start and what would be our destination, but also how. So I think if you are talking about international cooperation, then international cooperation need to cover the whole package. It's not only, let's say if you are talking about just energy transition, it's not only the renewable part, but also how we deal with the part that we don't want to see any longer, right? So I think that's would be my point.
Okay. My last word is India, Asia Pacific regions are dominated by small and medium-sized enterprises. And OECD study showed more than 50% of CO2 emissions come from small and medium-sized enterprises. However, they don't have any technology, they don't have money. So we are only focusing on large businesses. So I think in India and Asia-Pacific regions, we should also introduce those new technologies into small and medium-sized businesses. I think that technological transfer would be very important. And second one is helping them to finance those new introduction of technologies. I think that should be done within this region. That would be most important.
So if I may just add a bit, because you are talking about transfer, but I think each region, each country has their own resources, has their own local wisdom. So we need also to, build on that as well.
Thanks so much. Also, no easy feat for the region's energy transition. I think we've heard a lot of important key messages. It obviously needs to be a fair transition, and I think that means that we're including local communities, SMEs, from beginning to end. We're walking the walk, Bandana, as you said, so huge commitments have been made. And so how do we, as the international community and national governments, put our money where our mouth is? So thank you so much all. Really appreciate your time and your discussion today. Thanks.